use that during the presentations. And then when we move into some discussion time, we'll have an open format for people to join on this presentation stage and talk on video or just audio if they would like to. So anyway, welcome. And that's how things work. So Rob, what are you pointing at, Rob?
Cool transformers and such.
Yeah, I was showing Tom, I reorganized my shelves to show off some nerd cred.
Those are. Did you do that for this meetup, Rob?
Not specifically, but there's my TRS-80 manual. Tom's got one of those.
Oh yeah, wow. Big time.
There's my Webby.
You got a Webby?
Transformers down here. Yeah, man. My last company I worked for, Working Not Working, we won Best Employment Website of the Year.
Oh.
It's probably my favorite all-time video game right there, Revenge of Shinobi for Genesis. There's my custom Game Boy that runs Raspberry Zero Pi, so it actually has emulators. You can play like Super Nintendo games and Nintendo games on it. Yeah.
Was that Optimus at the top? What was your top shelf transformer?
This is actually Blitzwing from the new Bumblebee movie. It's like a super detailed model. It doesn't actually transform. It's just like a standing model. But that was like my ultimate ideal for a transformer. Where, the new Transformers movie, they were like these weird like shards and like unidentifiable objects. But this guy was like an actual jet that just turned into a cool looking robot.
Right. So you just went for the cool one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we can have these talks.
I also have a shelf. That's all now.
Fantastic.
I have bags hanging from a wall.
Peter's bag wall.
Yeah. Everyone to store anything in my house? I got a wall. You hang a bag on here. Totally cool.
You can get by with just a simple. Are those nails? There's nothing like a nail and board for organizations. So, well, we'll get started here. A few things. Let me see. Okay, so David DT, you're the only one on the session tab. That's good. Keep people over. Welcome to everyone, especially if it's your first time joining a RedwoodJS meetup. It's going to be a great time. Boy, have we got some treats for you today. Some tasty morsels. Hop-in is not exactly designed to do this, so a couple orientation things. This is, I guess we'll call it the stage, but anyone could join for audio, video, one or the other if you'd like. It'd be harder if it was not audio. But we're going to save all that till the end of this roughly hour where we open up for discussions. But for now, if everyone would use the chat tab, and in that there's two selections. Use the event instead of the session. We'll just keep everybody there. I cannot turn that off. I've tried so many times. All right. So within an hour, we've got a lot of fun things to cover. So Tom is going to kick some things off, just the state of the Redwood verse, and also talk a little bit about Redwood's architecture. And then Danny, we're hoping Danny is here. Danny is going to show off his Redwood API. Hey, there he is. Redwood API meets NextJS app. The architecture set up for that, because it turns out there's a lot you can do with Redwood and its API. So Danny's going to show that off. We're going to see some server full, new word. I think it's a new word, Peter. So running Redwood inside of a Docker container. Peter's going to show that off. If we have some time, then we're going to talk about we're going to do a little planning session as a group for Hacktoberfest and what that might look like for Redwood. And then we're going to talk about things. So some discussion and Q&A. We want everybody to join in. Did I hit all the things? Anything to add before we dive in, gents? Sounds good. And by the way, my name is David. If I haven't met you somewhere on the forums or Discord or all those things, I look forward to doing it. I'm part of the Redwood core team, and that's Tom, Rob, and Peter. They'll introduce themselves. Well, why don't you guys say hi right now? But we're all a part of the RedwoodJS core team, and we're just grateful you'd all join us for this next hour. And Peter will introduce his cat. So quick intros, and then I'll get out of here.
Hey, I'm Tom Preston Warner, team, and I live in California. And let's talk Redwood.
Hello, Rob Cameron, Redwood core team. I live in Southern California, a little north of San Diego. It's a beautiful day today. Let's talk Redwood.
Hey, I'm Peter. Core team, let's talk Redwood.
Live.
Berlin. I live in Berlin. Redwood.
Berlin. I want to go to Berlin again. I
can't
used to
wait
go to
you.
Berlin every 6 weeks or so, and now I haven't been in like 8 months.
We haven't had that good curry.
Berlin has the best red curry. If you ever go to Berlin, get the red curry. It is the best. The Vietnamese restaurant, the red curry at any of the Vietnamese restaurants is amazing.
Tom, your video is looking amazing. It looks a lot better than on Zoom.
Oh yeah, that's because I don't. Well, I think I have touch up my face in Zoom, so it kind of like makes me look more beautiful.
Your complexion.
No, but I mean,
now you can see.
It's just super sharp. It looks a lot better than on Zoom, like your shirt and everything. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. Okay.
Let's do this. All right.
Things off. Okay.
Yeah, kick it off and then hand over to Danny. And you're in charge of making sure Danny introduces himself. See the things I care about? All right. Catch you on the other side.
Okay, Redwood. So where are we at? So we're still working towards a 1.0 release, which we hope to do by the end of the year. There's some pretty big things still outstanding in that regard. Some of the big ones are around pre-rendering, which is something that I've put kind of a proposal for, but there's a lot of elements to pre-render. So what does that mean, and how is it different than server-side generation, server-side rendering? Those are things that we're contemplating. I'm hoping to put together a small group of people for us to really dig into that, because that's one of the big outstanding things that I really want to have for 1.0 that we haven't really even started working on. So if you have expertise in those matters, let me know, and we'll put together a little working group for that specifically. And another big one that we have is, I was thinking of it a second ago. What is it? Well, there's a couple of things. If you go to RedwoodJS.com, then in the left menu, you can see a link to the roadmap, and you see a lot of things there. I was going to say router. The router needs some work. There's still some performance issues with the router where it'll re-render layouts. So there's a couple of proposals that people have about how we could potentially address that. And there's some tricky things there. I want the router to work in a certain way. React doesn't love the router working in exactly that way, so we might have to write some things to work around that, or maybe make the hard choice of doing things a little bit differently with the router to prevent the re-rendering layouts when you go to different pages. That's going to be critical. So those are some big things. There's a lot of wrap up around testing, storybook, logging. We want to get some helpers in there for logging. But we're getting really close. We now have several deploy targets, and you'll learn about some of those today, but you can deploy. You've always been able to deploy to Netlify. Now you can deploy to Vercel, which is super easy. There's like no configuration. You're just like, hey, here's a Redwood app, and it's just like, got it. And it does everything minus the database, that's common to everywhere, because using a database on the Jamstack is still a little out of the ordinary. So we're trying to find ways to make that more first class as well. And there's people I know working on ways to make that easier. People experimenting with Fauna as a database. So there's a lot of experimentation going on to see what are the right elements in a Redwood app. What can they even be outside of what we've already envisioned? So a lot of cool experimentation happening there. That's what's happening with Redwood. We have over 100 contributors, probably 120 by now. And it's going awesome. We got 4,600 stars on GitHub. So if you haven't starred RedwoodJS on GitHub, that would help us a lot. Like, this is a way of establishing credibility for the project. It gets more people interested. So if you're able to do that, that would be awesome. We have a Twitter account, RedwoodJS on Twitter. Give that a follow. We announce all of these meetups and the other types of things that we do, all of the releases. And a lot of interesting content comes across there. So follow us on Twitter at RedwoodJS. So I wanted to jump into a quick overview of the architecture of Redwood to introduce the things that Danny is going to talk about. So I will share my screen to do that. And I'm going to just share this window right here. And hopefully that's working now. Okay, great. So let me get this guy out of the way. All right, so this is the Redwood architecture. Oh, I wanted to bring up in Photoshop so I can draw it. Okay, here we go. So here's an overview of the Redwood architecture. So you'll notice that Redwood application is two things. It has a web side and it has an API side. The web side is a React application that you write and author, and then that gets deployed to a CDN. So if you put this on Netlify, that'll go, and your React front end, which is a JavaScript client written in React, will be deployed to the CDN. And then there's another thing, and I'm going to choose another color. Here we go, is the API. So your API ends up being a GraphQL, an implementation of a GraphQL API. We use Apollo for that right now. So you write your React front end and you write your GraphQL API, essentially your website and your API side. And these both get deployed into the cloud or servers, wherever you want to put them. And then the request response cycle ends up looking like you have a browser, right? And your browser gets a copy of the React front end, right? Downloads the necessary bundle so that it has it locally here. And then once you have that and you want data, then that's going to start contacting the GraphQL API, making GraphQL requests and getting responses. And so in order to create those responses,
Are you drawing on your screen at this minute? Where on your other screen?
Oh no! Oh, I shared the wrong one. Crap!
I'm so sorry. I tried. I was like,
okay, hold on.
Okay.
You're missing all my pretty colors. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, where are the colors?
I'm gonna reshare. Thank you for telling me. I totally blew it. I picked the wrong window. I'm gonna pick the correct window.
Here's a startup idea. There's a separate page you go to where people can push a button that makes a sound, and then everyone who's on the same call can hear the sound.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
We need that feature. For me mostly. Okay, well now you can see my amazing colors. Imagine that I was drawing them before, which I was actually. Okay, so here we go. So you saw all this, but I was highlighting. I'm sure you could imagine where I was making color drawings. But so I was at the GraphQL API making responses. So the response comes back down to your browser, and now you're displaying data. So within your GraphQL API, you've got, you're making database calls, right? This is a full stack web application. You want to be able to store things in a database and query them. And you do that within your GraphQL API. And right now we tend to use Prisma for that. So in your GraphQL API, you're making calls to your database via Prisma and getting responses back. And so this is the overall life cycle of a Redwood app. And in this diagram here, we're showing that you're potentially going to deploy your API side to Lambdas via Netlify. So Netlify will pick up your code and it'll just automatically deploy it to Lambda functions. You'll see later on in this meetup that you can do this different ways. You don't actually have to use Netlify. Like this could be Vercel, or it could be direct to AWS. So you can do this in a bunch of different ways in containers. And for the database right now, we support via Prisma, we support SQLite, which would use locally, and then MySQL and Postgres. And in the future, Prisma hopes to support a bunch of other types of databases as well, including things like Fauna, NoSQL databases like Fauna and Mongo. So this is the overall cycle. And then I want to point out one more thing, which is the architecture of Redwood has been designed from the very beginning to use GraphQL on the API side, because we envision a future where we support not only web applications, but also mobile applications and command line interfaces, and they will all use GraphQL. So any of these front ends, you've got one which is a web application. You could have a mobile application. You could have a command line interface. You could have a kiosk. You could have whatever you want, anything you want, any client you want can talk GraphQL and get data that way. So you write your backend one time, and then you consume it from as many front ends as you want, right? This is the architecture that we started with to make that process easy in a multi-client universe. So that's an introduction to the architecture, and that sets you up well to be able to understand what Danny is going to talk about. So I will turn it over to Danny, who has been part of the Redwood community for quite a while. If you want to come on, share your video, Danny, great. He's been an amazing help and has a production application that he has built using Redwood, one of several production apps. So he's a very brave person to be using Redwood this early. But that's been production for a while now. So he loves the bleeding edge and the excitement of living on that edge. So I will let him further introduce himself. And I'm happy to also say that he is a community lead, which means that he takes additional responsibility in the community and engagement with Redwood. So if you have questions around any of this, he is there to help you out, just as we are on the core. And we're very happy to have him in that position on the Redwood team. So take it away, Danny.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good. So, I'm Danny, as Tom has mentioned, and today I want to do something unusual because I like living on the edge. Written for our production service, and try not to give away the whole thing, which would make the whole point of building a product pointless, but hopefully it just shows you how we put this together. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing is I'm going to share my screen. My monitor is it's one of those ultra wide monitors, and I don't have a secondary screen. Yeah, looking okay to everyone? Cool. So the first thing I want to show you is very quickly about what we built, and then I'll go into how we built it and why we built it with Next on top of Redwood, and then show you some code about how we did it. So this is the Tape dashboard. This is all Redwood. It's been the same since we first demoed it in one of the early meetups. But one of the things we're doing is, for example, when you want to share an image or a GIF or whatever it is. So currently in production, this is what you get: literally just the image of whatever you recorded from your mobile device. And what I'm going to show you today is, so this is another example of a video that just plays directly. But I wanted to show you our NextJS app, which loads exactly this image inside. But what it's doing behind the scenes is that it's hitting the Redwood API, like Tom discussed. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. So this is what we're building. This is the NextJS app. And I'll go into, there's not a lot of slides, don't worry. I'll go into code very, very quickly. So one of the things that you're probably wondering is, why in the world am I using NextJS on top of Redwood? So first of all, Redwood, we're very, very happy with Redwood. We've been with Redwood since quite early on, and we've seen it grow. We've been part of its growth, so we're very, very happy with the experience of it. Now, our Redwood site, Tape.sh, already has pre-rendering, which I've written a tutorial for on the forums if you're interested. We're super happy with how easy it is to just add features here and there. But to build that, one of the things that we were missing, there we go. So one of the things it's missing is previews that get generated when you share on Slack or on Twitter or on WhatsApp. And they tend to look like this. And the way you implement it typically on a website is just to really implement very simple OG tags, which doesn't stand for the normal OG, it means open graph. Every time I look at it, I always say, yeah, I'm doing OG stuff and I enjoy it. But it means open graph, originally from Facebook. But what it is just these little headers that tell Slack or whatever to parse the URL you're sharing and create that little preview. Now, the problem with that is that when you share a tape URL, I'll bring this up again. You can see that this bit is dynamic. And so this isn't exactly how the stack at the moment, at least on Netlify and Redwood currently works, because we can certainly have OG headers like we do on our website, but as soon as it becomes dynamic, it becomes a server full thing. So we need server-side rendering, and debatably, I'm saying that it's not quite Jamstack, but the word Jamstack's evolving all the time. But luckily, we know that we can pull this data off the Redwood API. In the future, like Tom mentioned, that we are probably going to have pre-rendering back in Redwood. But in my case, we try and pick the right tool for the right job. And right now, it's NextJS to do this simple website for the previews when you share it. So Tom's already gone through this, but I'm going to do a quick overview again if the browser decides to go forward. Is this simplified architecture of what it used to be with Redwood. So this is what everyone gets when you start your Redwood app. So you have your front end in React and the GraphQL API. You can see this diagram is intentionally simplified. But what we're going to do now is essentially add another client that speaks to our main Redwood app, which is share.tape.sh, which is in Next.js. And in the future, we're also planning other clients. So it's just using the Redwood APIs to do to perform various functions that hopefully our users will like. So that's enough of the slides. I'll go straight into the code now. So I'm not going to live code because whenever I share my screen, my computer grinds to up, but I will show you the code instead, and we'll go through the following steps. I'm just going to check if everyone can read the screen okay. Is the code clear? Bigger text. Okay. More. Sorry, my screen is it's one of the ultra wide ones. Okay, good. Great. So over here on the left is Redwood in Redwood Ret. And over here on the right, we have Next.js. So I'm going to show both and kind of show you how it gets implemented. So hopefully you're seeing the highlighting happen as well, so you can follow me on the screen. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add the types and the query for this new endpoint that we're going to consume in Next to the SDL. So if we go here, and again, I'm just showing all of the code here. I think it's totally fine. All of this is public anyway. The SDL, you can go onto the thing and have a look yourself. There's nothing new that I'm showing off here. But what I'm going to show you is this is what we originally have in our tape for our cells. So when you're signed in, all of this information you can retrieve from the GraphQL API. Particularly this bit, when you have a public API with no authentication, we didn't want to reveal this information. So what we did was we added a different type called public tape. And so if I just highlight this bit, this is the important bit of the code that we should pay attention to at the moment. So these are all of the types that you add to your SDL. And again, we don't need database changes because it's just picking existing data that's already there. And then we add this new query. So originally we used to have tapes, and now we added tapes from slug. The reason it's slug is because on the next step, we're going to get a file key, which you can hopefully see here, a file key and the file name, and then we're just going to query that API from that. What we're going to retrieve is the URL, the content types, and a bunch of metadata, which I have here as well. So width, height, whatever it is. So I'm going to show you what that looks like now very quickly using Insomnia, if I can find it. There it is. So this is currently running in production, but our clients haven't updated the CLI. So you can still see it, but nobody's currently using it because it needs a little bit of tweaking. So exactly the query that we're going to use in the NextJS app. And you'll notice that in the headers, there's no authentication tokens, none of that, because we want the API to be public here. I'm going to show you a quick thing that you can use if you're going to go into NextJS. What we want is to pull this data on the server side. So what we probably want is just this fetch header. And you can see that it's going to call our API. This is pointing at our production instance. And then pass in the query, blah, blah, blah. And I'll go into that code in a second. So that's part one done. Before we go into adding services, in order to get this response, of course, we need to add a service to pull that data from the database. So let's go into adding services. But before we do that, I want to show off something cool that I think everyone should know about. So when you write your SDLs, sometimes it becomes confusing what you've named things. And often I do this a lot. I make typos on queries and query names and that sort of thing. But you can see that if you name it wrong, you get this error from VS Code. And that's because I have this decoupled extension, which Aldo has been working on, installed. I find it amazingly useful. So especially if you're starting out, I would recommend downloading this so that you know exactly what's happening. Let's now go into the service code. I'm going to reduce it just a little bit so that you can see everything. So tape from slug is the function we set up on the SDL that GraphQL will call. If you ignore that for a second, I've been messing around with it. So what it does is it just gets the folder key and the tape name, finds the database, and returns the tape. And because we have the public tape limited to certain values, it won't release to the API more than what we're writing down in the SDL. So I'm just going to do a quick check if everyone's happy with everything so far. Yeah. I can't see. Okay, so I'm going to continue. That's the next step. Of course, we don't need to modify the database because there's no new things to add to the database. Cool. So that's us done with the Redwood side. You already saw us querying it. So what I'm going to do now is head over to the NextJS. Fetch from the Redwood API. So I'm going to show you the structure very quickly. It's a super, super simple app. So in our case, we have the folder key, which you saw earlier in the URL, and then we have the tape ID. It's not exactly an ID, but hey, it's the name of the file. And then we have our TSX file where you can render the component for it. So now let's add the fetch into our file. So NextJS has this concept of get static props. There's a lot to see here, so I'm going to go slowly. But get static props essentially says, do some stuff on the server, on the rendering process side, before you render the actual page. So what we're going to do here in get static props, this is where SSG or ISSG comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to hit our API endpoint. We're going to get the data we need, and we're going to pass it as props to our component. So you can see there's this function get tape metadata. I'll go into it in a second. Constructs a couple of things, and then it returns this prop here. Errors is true if there are errors. And the reason I do this is because GraphQL usually comes back with 200, even if you have errors. So if we jump into Redwood again very quickly, you can see I throw an error when there aren't any tapes that it finds. But you can see here that even though there'll be an error, it'll be 200. So what we do is do a little check. If there are errors, return error true, and the front end knows how to handle it. Remember, get static props is very, very simple. You don't want a Apollo client, at least I don't think, Apollo client and various tools here. You just want the simplest possible code here, and do more complicated things in your actual component if you want dynamicness. In our case, we don't need it. We just want static stuff, nice and easy. But if it goes well, we return the tape, current URL, error, blah, blah, blah. Once we have that, what we do is we pass the details onto this OG metadata component, which renders a bunch of the headers. I can show you this, but really, there's nothing special in it. Just renders a bunch of headers. This is where NextJS comes in handy because it's doing it on the server side. You can see it's doing head and adds all of these meta tags. So what happens is when you come onto the site or the parser bot goes onto the website, they can read all of these headers and render whatever preview that they're creating. So that's the gist of what it's doing. Now let's do the bit where we integrate the Redwood API, nice and simple. So I'm going to, just to make it a little bit easier for everyone, I'm going to try and highlight this section of the code because other stuff doesn't matter at the moment. So what we're doing is we're taking that query, which you saw on Insomnia, literally copy-pasted it. This is just some code to make it look nicer, but you can literally copy-paste the fetch if you would like. You can see we're using the process environment, and that's so that we can switch between production and pre-prod. Once we have the results, simply give it back here, and we're good to go. And that's essentially the whole integration complete. I should have stopped in the middle, but I'm going to show you one other thing, actually. So this is a bit odd. So one of the things I didn't quite can't just throw new error and expect that the NextJS code is going to handle it for you. And that's because it's happening on the server side. So what you want to do is you want to return that error true and have your front end handle what you want to do. In our case, the only time you really get an error is if you put in the wrong URL. So we just redirect you to a 404 page. And that is basically it. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, but I am going to open it up to questions if there's any questions on the implementation. Yes, thank you very much, Robert. You're right in that this is something I realized after we implemented it. Oh, called the Redwood service. Okay, so let me finish what I was saying first. So a potentially different solution to this would be to have a custom Redwood function, which instead of going into the GraphQL layer, which uses a post, you can just have a custom function which uses a get to read that from your service. The reason we don't want the NextJS app to connect to the database is because we want that separation between, we want the Redwood app to have that full control over the database. The more places you reveal your database secrets, the harder it gets to protect it, I guess. At least that's my opinion. So that's the reason we treat the NextJS stuff as a client. The other reason why I don't think it's important to go straight to the database is because the next pre-rendering that happens, it calls the API once, and from then on, it's cached. There's no reason to call the API again for the same link. So, so even if 100 people land on the same page, it gets cached, and there's no reason to optimize for performance in that sense. Happy?
Thanks, Danny. This is awesome. I have a quick question. So what is the minimum amount of stuff we need to build in Redwood to get to solve this use case for you, do you think?
Excuse me. So there's a couple of reasons we went with Next in this case. So one is actually not related to Redwood or the technology. It's actually to do with Netlify versus Vercel here. Vercel has that capability right now. I know Netlify is working on it. So it's just a question of, we wanted to get it out right now. That's why we went with Next and Vercel, which kind of has it built in. So with Netlify, we'd need to work out, with Redwood being potentially the first-class citizen there, the same way Next is on Vercel, we probably need to work out how do we call that server render function to cache the results from a render and then display that to the user. Because right now, in the Netlify Jamstack model, which is, I think, more idiomatic Jamstack, if you will, it's only to serve static files, which makes sense to me. And we do that in most cases. In this case, it needs to be dynamic. And yeah, that's why we went with it. I'm very keen to help solve this on Redwood because I think they're very, very good, both of them, both Next and Redwood, obviously. But the joy I get from writing in Redwood just makes me want to use it more. Next can do everything probably the same, but I just enjoy more writing in Redwood.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Cool. I'm going to drop off then if there are no other questions.
Thank you, Danny.
Cool.
I just
Later.
want to say that's great. We are recording this. I took some good notes, and any well, anything we shouldn't be recording, we could edit that out. But you let me know. It'd be great to get a couple of those slides, especially the one you did of the architecture. And we'll post all that on the forum when we're done. But we've had a lot of questions on the forum about how could we use NextJS with Redwood, and what we wanted Danny to show is that effectively it's very possible, very simple. Built into Redwood's architecture is that you can use it as a standalone API, or you could use it with the full app as Danny is doing. More importantly, we want it to be, it's the one API to rule them all. So meaning you don't have to think of having an API per client, per application. You can have one API that serves and integrates with everything. So that's fun. That's the GraphQL side. So, and by the way, Tape.sh is awesome. Danny, would you post the link to Tape.sh sites and also your Twitter? Because there's some cool stuff coming out. I don't know if we're weeks away or days away, You're going to want to know months then. As a product manager, I would double that time. So in about a month, you're going to see, right? That's the engineering safety factor. You're going to see some really cool stuff coming out from Tape.sh that you are going to want to use for yourself, because we've had some sneak peeks, and that's really great. So, Danny, thank you. It's just a pleasure having you part of this community.
Danny, what's the pronunciation? Is it tape.sh or is it tape?
It's whatever you want to pronounce it as.
Oh, okay.
I've never thought of it as tape. It's quite good though.
All right.
I mean, it's not meant to be secret, so hey. All right.
I think Peter's up. Peter, are you going to show us things?
I'm going to show you things. Reporting from the startup garage.
All right, I'm out of here. You go get them.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Infinite loop. There we go. All right, so one of the things that we optimize, let me just put that window up here on the other side so I can make sure that people are able to see me bigger, or that I'm able to see what people want. Okay, so one of the things that we want to do at, I almost said at Chatterbug, at Redwood, is that we want to make sure that you can deploy to any environment that you want to. So we have AWS serverless, we have Netlify, and we have Vercel. But what if you wanted to just deploy on your own production server somewhere where you have a Postgres database already there and you have Nginx or something like that? So that's actually now possible. And how you do that is, this is the example app, the example to-do app. So if you run it, it looks like this. Sorry, I wrote some funny things in there. Luckily, I didn't write any swear words, which is usually what I do. That was risky. Okay, so I'm gonna close this off. What you would likely want to do if you want to self-host that particular app is you would run yarn redwood build. It will build then the web side as static HTML, and it will build the API side as transpiled JavaScript. So the website is pretty easy to serve. You just take Nginx, you'd configure it to serve the static HTML, and let me just show you where that pops that out. So here is the static HTML. I think if you open this, it won't work because it needs to be served from a actual HTTP server. But here are all the files. You just serve these. On the API side, you go into this folder. There's another folder called dist, and this is what we actually want to serve. So one way that people have been doing this is by typing dev API, but this is obviously development mode. You don't want to do this because it uses more memory. It reloads when files change. It's just not the right thing to do. So what you can do is you can type yarn add at RedwoodJS API server. That will install our new API server, which is an Express.js application that allows you to serve the built version of a Redwood API side. So how you do that is you type yarn API server. Just a second here. What's going on? Yarn API server. Okay, I don't know why this is not working when it was working earlier. Perfect demo. Nope. I'm just going to run yarn again and reinstall things. Is anyone here in the chat to help me? Nope. I literally just had this working a second ago. Yarn API server. There we go. All right, it was just a borked yarn installation. So I type yarn API server. I read the errors, and there's two options that you can change. One is the port. By default, it will be 8911, and the other one is the path to the functions. Now that I'm seeing this, I can actually make this .dist /functions. So how you do that is yarn API server minus F or dash dash functions, and you say .dist functions. That will, okay, it's actually meant to run it. Oh, geez. Okay. There was actually a step that I wanted to show you before, which is this thing called PM2. I mean afterwards, but let's get back to this. So you run yarn API server dash dash functions, and you point it to the functions that you want to serve. And now these are available on localhost 8.9.11. And you'll see it's much more responsive. And here is your API running like it would on the dev server, but you can actually use this as an actual production server. So one of the things that you want to prevent against is that if this process dies for whatever reason, an unhandled exception, that your entire website doesn't go down. So one of the tools that a lot of Node.js developers use for that is a product called, or it's just a CLI tool called PM2. I've already installed that. It's a daemon that makes sure that node processors are long running. And that's why I couldn't start the API server before. So if I type yarn PM2 ls, you'll see over here I have this thing called functions, which is I wrote the command badly. So if I type yarn PM2 start yarn API server minus F, this functions, that should start a long running process. And you see it's running here. And now if I go to localhost 8.9.11, prockill will be there. And no matter what I do, I can close these. It will just continue running forever, blocking any subsequent attempts to use that. So I actually need to stop that. X RedwoodJS example to do yarn PM2 stop all. And I'm going to delete those two. Delete functions. And they're gone. And that is my demo. So, yeah, that's it. Stop sharing. Exactly, Anthony. That is exactly the reason why I built it. You could take, we're also going to start adding Docker containers, or we're going to add the ability to containerize your apps. And you can stick this on AWS Fargate or any Kubernetes or container runtime environment, and you can run it yourself as a long-running process. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, this is just this is the traditional, like if you want to go back in time before serverless and pretend that that's the only thing that exists, then this is how you would do it, right? You would have a server that served. Yeah, you could spin up a zillion of them if you want in a bunch of different places. You manage your own connections to your database in the way that you normally would back in a more traditional architecture. And so if you want to do things the easy way, then you can deploy to Netlify. You got a database running somewhere. It's super easy, just runs everything for you. You get some nice characteristics of scalability with the Lambda functions, but Lambda functions come with their own restrictions, right? Like they have cold start times. They have size restrictions on how much code you can put into them. They have memory restrictions. They have timeout restrictions. If you don't want any of those restrictions, if you have needs that are outside of that, and maybe Peter, you can speak to for just a minute about what drove you to make this work right now in the stuff that you're building, so that other people might be able to identify their own needs in that same sort of case.
So part of the reason why I wanted this to happen was because I'm building a tool that has to chat to foreign databases, and some of those requests take quite long, and I don't have any background processing yet, and they would often time out before 10 seconds. So it's obviously not a great case to have a network request that takes longer than 10 seconds, but I'm chatting to databases that I don't really control. So to have those just get killed is really frustrating, and it's just a hard problem that I'm trying to solve.
Something that, go ahead, Rem.
Go ahead. I was going to say, this could end up being cheaper and more Netlify though, right? Because Netlify lambdas are stuck in US East 1, right? Mm-hmm. So these, you could have 3 EC2 servers behind a load balancer, and AWS will just globally distribute those requests out to those servers, and a nano or a small server is like $5 a month or something. It's not free, but I mean, Netlify's first tier is what, like $50 a month. So you could have several of these running before you even got to their first paid tier. I forget what the cost is for it, but
Daniel says, but you have to learn all the AWS product names.
well,
that is the downside.
That's true. They charge $20 for a load balancer. Like that's where they get you. Spin up as many things as you want, but then as soon as you want them, don't please.
And
is it minimum of 20? I thought it was still based
$18.
on. I thought it was still based on traffic. No.
No, the AWS load balancers, but no, that's a great. Well, and I think the other hybrid opportunities. So I was going to list some of the things we've seen people request this for, like that they need to do, and some of it is just regionally wherever you are. Some people just need to host some things locally in order to actually, like for an internal company app, people need this because they don't want to deploy it. But another opportunity we have here that you guys are maybe just to say explicitly is having some hybrid architecture. So there are some things that you would run serverlessly, and there are some things you may need to run serverful, if that's the word. But so Rob, maybe that's where you're running with some of the stuff.
Yeah, maybe. What was the first step again? Was it just you just build web and then just deploy that list to your CDN?
Yeah. So you run Redwood build, so it transpiles the JavaScript, and it will stick either of those web or API into the dist folder, and then you just point the API server to the already transpiled JavaScript,
Right.
because it does not understand the modern syntax.
So one thing that DT, David Teresin, points out, which has been on my mind a lot as Rob and I are working a lot on Repeater, which is a background job processing orchestrator, is the idea that people are going to have jobs, and Peter being one of them, and DT another one of them, where you don't want the restrictions that Lambdas have. So even if your website, Lambda would be perfect to do the GraphQL calls for all of your normal website stuff, you might have background jobs that are going to take a half an hour, or a day to run, or whatever. Those aren't going to work in Lambdas. And this is where you might want to split those off and run those straight on AWS, so that you have none of those restrictions. You can have those processes run for as long as you want. You can spread them out on as many machines as you need to. You have total control over that part of your architecture. And so what Repeater would do, you just tell Repeater, hey, I want to run this job every minute, or let's say every hour, and it takes a half an hour to run. It'll just ping over to wherever you want, and that can be your sort of jobs server that is running those on AWS via container or however you want to do it. And then those jobs can run for as long as you want. And that's, I think, a really cool thing. So something that I would love to work on in the future is essentially a jobs side of Redwood. Where right now the way you have to do it is you're creating custom functions and you put whatever your job stuff is in there, but that kind of conflates it with the like, yes, it's part of the API side, but like these are functions, but the way that you would write something to be consumed, to be used by Repeater, or in the future, I'm sure other job background orchestration services, you don't need quite as much access as the custom functions. Like when you're writing the custom functions, you have to write the whole handler stuff. Like it's sort of annoying. Like it's not very annoying, but it still is conceptually just mixed in with whatever other custom functions you might want. So the idea that we could have a side that is just your list of job functions and written in a way that we know how to serve them as a unified thing, so that you don't have to write the entire handler and group together into just your jobs. I think that could be a really elegant thing. It just separates them out. It just provides more organization and a consistent format, and you just know very easily how to do it. And then it's like, okay, this you can deploy separately. And then it's like, we make the deployment process really easy to get your web stuff over here and your jobs over here and your API over here. And we just make that whole orchestration process super easy.
Yeah.
We can have a nice local dev flow too, so you're not actually going out to like Repeater to run your job. It just runs in another process locally.
Yeah, right. So we can provide some things to make running the Repeater, what Repeater would be doing for you, make that run locally in an easy way. And we'll have to figure out how to do that, because that comes with its own database and its own set of runners, and it's got its own chunk of machinery that to run locally is a bit annoying to set up. Even if you had access to the repeater code, it's still kind of annoying to run locally. But we can do something that is like a super simple version of that maybe just runs everything instantly, or something. I don't know. We'll have to think about that, Rob. But I think there's some cool ideas there.
Yeah, and we have like a more generic interface. So if there's other job runners in the future, you can just kind of plug those in, which will use the standard Redwood interface to create your jobs, and then yeah. Did you guys know, by the way, Tom's a full-time repeater dev now? I don't know if these guys know that.
Rob and I have been hacking on this a little bit. There's a repeater is an interesting divergent case from the normal delayed job. So Rob wrote it with delayed job, which is the Rails, one of the Rails, kind of the big Rails background job processors, but it expects to run the jobs in line. And so the workers take a job and then they actually run it on your machine in that Ruby process. But what repeater needs to do is something that's very fast. It needs to just make a request, an HTTP request to your thing that runs, but it has to wait for the response. And that ends up being a really bad use case for delayed jobs workers, because you have a Ruby process sitting there waiting for who knows how long for a response, using up an entire worker thread. And if you know Ruby is not the most memory efficient thing in the world. So if you have a ton of these, then you sit there with, a Ruby process taking up a bunch of memory and blocking, and it's just super inefficient. And we had someone come along that was wondering if they could do 100,000 requests an hour. And we're like, yes, but it's going to cost you like $2,000 a month, right? Which for this type of thing to do is ridiculous. So then we started talking about how would you do this the proper way. And I was like, well, you just need something that's asynchronous, like Node. And so I started whipping up a Node worker for that. And so I have a prototype for that kind of works. Yeah, I'm still writing it, but it just uses it uses Axios to do the actual call. But it's just you would just await it, and then you do it in a loop, and you've got a number of workers that you can tell it to do. And for that workload to do 100,000 requests an hour, it's about 28 per second. And so you need something like 420 workers to do that. If the response time, and this person was saying the responses would be between 10 and 15 seconds is about how long they thought they would take. So for jobs that take 10 to 15 seconds to do 28 a second, you need about 420 workers. So I spun that up, and on my laptop, on my MacBook Air, it was taking like 5% CPU and very easily going through 28 a second, right? Because all it's doing is a request and then waiting asynchronously for the response. So with that architecture, then we'll be able to do the things that repeater wants to do at extremely high volumes with no problems.
And he's got a name for it
again.
Tell him that name.
What? Oh, it's called Kamaji, which, if you've seen Spirited Away, the movie, the Miyazaki film, Spirited Away, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, Rob, then you got to go watch it immediately. And Kamaji is the boiler man. So it's this guy that has 6 arms and 2 legs, but he doesn't even use his legs. They're like vestigial. And he runs the boiler, and he's constantly doing stuff. He's just always doing stuff. So I thought that would be
he's like a spider. He's like half a spider.
He's like a spider. Yeah.
Technically, I own the movie. I just haven't watched it yet.
We're
half points. You get half points.
Man, I bought I've got Miyazaki's collection. You can get them all in one little very tiny box set. But hey, Peter, one question for you, and then we're at an hour, so I wanted to at least have some pause time here for people to ask some questions. We can go over if needed. But Peter, the Docker file side of this, were you ready to kind of, is there anything we could show people on that, or is it mainly for local instances? That's what we have ready to go.
I've started working on it, but I'm actually not a Docker expert. So if anyone is and uses it in production, I'd love it if you could reach out to me and just check to see that I'm doing the right thing.
Okay.
Basically, what I have is multiple layers. I have a layer for building, and I think that's what you call them. And then I have a layer for actually running the API side, and I don't know what to do with the website. Maybe there's, I don't know. I'd love to just to have someone chat it over with me.
Yeah. So one of the challenges there is with Yarn workspaces and getting that to be performant with Docker. We don't want to add everything. We really just need to get the build into the container. But how do you do that for local dev, and then how do you do that for production? So if anyone is a Docker Pro TM, we'd love some help with that. Contact Peter.
Do you have a docs page for that yet?
The API server?
Yeah.
No, I haven't even. I haven't. It's nowhere.
Okay.
All right, I've got some notes. We'll get some stuff. We'll get some links for what we did show in the recording for this posted. For those who can stick around, so we're at an hour, and it works on Peter's machine. Totally, we got a new machine, so that's a good thing. We're at an hour. If anyone, let's open up for some questions here. But one thing before everyone takes off is we are doing some planning for Hacktoberfest in October, and the next RedwoodJS meetup will be on October 8th. I believe that's the correct date. That is 2 weeks from today, and it is going to be all about contributing. So we want and are always putting time, energy, and focus into creating a community around RedwoodJS. So it's not, the point is the people, right? So here's, I guess, what I say quite a bit, or a little bit of a mantra is, by helping others be successful with Redwood, that's what's going to make RedwoodJS successful. And we want this to be a community project that's growing, it's increasing. 120 contributors is just fantastic for a project that's basically 6 months in the wild now. And we want more. We want more people to be a part of this community. So that's what Hacktoberfest is going to be about, and that's what we'll focus on at the meetup 2 weeks out from now. We're thinking about creating some kind of working project groups around Hacktoberfest. So look for some things on the forums, and we could just use some help and people that want to kind of help lead a focus area for Hacktoberfest. We'd love people to volunteer and be a part of making that fun for everyone. And there's two things we need help with. One, helping people find things to work on that are bite-sized, but also helping us create issues and tasks that are actually bite-sized that people can work on. And that's where we're going to need some help. So that'll be Hacktoberfest. So that's kind of it for announcements. Should we just open up anything else, gents, before we open up for some just discussions and Q&A? And if you have to go, we understand, but we can just do an open format from here on out, for as long as, well, until we get kicked out.
Ask us questions in the chat. Join the video.
Yeah, whoever wants to join the video, now's your chance. Ask your questions live, or tell us what you're up to, or if you're using Redwood for something, we'd love to hear any of your use cases, anything that you find to be missing in Redwood or awkward to use or missing documentation. These are all things that we want to know. Or we just want to meet you. Just say hi.
I can go through the film simulation modes on my camera. These all simulate like famous Fuji films. There's like a Velvia, it's like super saturated. There's a classic Chrome. I got
while Rob's going through his camera settings, if anyone wants to jump in or throw any questions, now is your time.
There's a bleach bypass, which is kind of like what they used in
well, I like that. What was the one
300? So it looks like a kind of, it's kind of neat effect, like desaturated.
Yeah.
It's also some really nice black and whites macros with a yellow or with a red filter.
Ooh, John says you're building a photograph portfolio website. Ooh, nice. Rob and I have both done a lot of photography in our past.
Yeah.
I wonder what John is using where he's storing his photos.
Yeah. Do you want to elaborate on your architecture, John? It's really interesting to see what databases people have chosen, for instance. So you're figuring it out. Fair enough.
I'll tell you what I used. I built one for my wife, who's a photographer.
For the blog, we went with FileStack, and they have all kinds of neat filtering on the way out. So you just upload the biggest, rawest image you can imagine, And then in the URL, you give it all kind of filter parameters like size and crop and compression, and it just returns it and then caches that return one super small and super fast. Eric knows about Fuji. That's right.
I just bought a Sony. I just bought a Sony A6400 to be my webcam to replace my Canon 5D Mark III, which I'm using right now. The problem with the Mark III is that it's a number of years old now, and they did not think of the webcam use case. So it's really pretty obnoxious to get working as a webcam. And the mirror, it has a mirror, so it has to lock the mirror up when you're videoing, and so it likes to turn off after half an hour. And half an hour is the maximum amount of time that you can have it stay on before it turns off. So I have to like keep pressing the like focus button to get it to register like an event so that it doesn't turn off. So when I'm doing calls with this thing, it's constantly turning off it just goes black, and then it shows like some text, and it's a little embarrassing.
You have to build like a whole robot arm, and all it does is just reach out and goes and just touches the focus button.
I know. You get one of those a little beaker guy from Darkman. Remember? It's like the lighter. It's like doop, doop, doop.
Yep.
Just need that guy.
Hey, I've got a question. Anyone else? And John, I chime in on this as well. But anyone else who's new to Redwood, I'd love to know some of the things that were surprisingly easy, but also learning curve. Where were the things that required a bit more learning curve so far than you thought, or just as you were diving in, where did you need to spend some more time getting up to speed? And don't everyone jump in at once.
Oh, Backblaze. Danny says he's just me too. Do they have a consumer storage, like random storage thing? I didn't know that Backblaze did that. I thought they were just backups.
S3 compatible.
Huh? Didn't know that. But super cheap. Neat.
Yeah, John, I guess you want to do it cheap. Like if you can, well, but if you're running, you have to run your own server. But if you can run ImageMagick, I mean, you can transform the image all you want locally and then upload the optimized one to S3 or Cloudinary, and it'll be pennies for billions of requests. But then you have to run ImageMagick for the rest of your life.
ImageMagick. ImageMagick always fails to compile.
Did you see that XKCD comic recently?
Oh, I think you mentioned it. It's ImageMagick and Nokagiri. Nokagiri there's always some problem with Nokagiri compiling in Ruby.
I wish there was a good way to share this. I'm going to share my whole screen, but I guess I have to.
Wasabi, also S3 compatible. Oh yeah, I did see that comic.
There it is.
So true.
ImageMagick. Yeah, right
yeah.
there.
FFmpeg.
It says in the alt, someday ImageMagick will finally break for good, and we'll have a long period of scrambling as we try to reassemble civilization from the rubble.
FFmpeg can also do a lot of stuff on still images also if you want.
The browsers lists people use that image to say, hey, this is us down here. No one ever gives us any money. We're like the backbone of the modern internet. Someone support us. Yes, I gave them some money.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I sponsor projects that I think are helping the internet.
So noble.
Yeah.
You're a good person, Peter.
Well, they retweet
I support.
Say that I do that.
I support Jekyll. I give money to a bunch of open source projects via Open Collective. So I give Jekyll money every month. I'm not sure what they use it for though.
Sponsor Chakra UI, right?
Chakra, yep. So I support Chakra UI and a bunch of just individual developers on GitHub using the GitHub sponsor thing.
I do Patreon for Pi-hole. You run Pi-hole, don't you now, Peter?
I do.
Yeah, it's great, right?
Yeah, don't they just sell my traffic to some other third-party Russian site, and that's how they make money?
Oh God, I thought they didn't do that. That was their whole thing.
No, I'm kidding. Probably.
For people who don't know, Pi-hole is a DNS sinkhole, which is a cool concept. So it's like an ad blocker that can't be overwritten, because when the ad request goes out to, or the JavaScript running to run an ad from doubleclick.net, Pi-hole just takes that DNS request and sends it to null, basically. So it never returns. So you just can't see ads anymore. And there's, in theory, no way for third-party ad providers to get around that. It just runs on your network.
You just plug that in, and it's just a server on your network. And
yeah, so it's running on a Raspberry Pi 4, actually right back here. This little cluster. It's running on a Pi 4. And what you do is when this guy when this guy gets an IP address, you tell all your local computers or your router to use that as its DNS server instead of like the ISP's DNS server. So technically,
does it ever fail?
It hasn't failed for me. It's been really good. But it'll also, your router will like fall back to your ISP one if that one goes away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
it filters all DNS traffic. It's not like all internet traffic, just DNS requests go through that guy.
But have you noticed that Google actually they do like pre-resolution that doesn't use DNS? So they actually circumvent your Pi hole.
Is that a new thing they do?
Yeah. So I switched. I went to Brave because they don't do that.
That's a whole browser, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's basically Google Chrome under the hood.
How is Brave? They had an ICO that went phenomenally well for them.
Initial coin offering.
I turn off all the stuff like that.
I used it once or twice. They've got some weird stuff that they're building on top. They're trying to do monetization types of things like micropayments, I think, too, right?
Yeah.
That token.
Yeah, the token things. Man, Anthony.
Danny, thank you.
Anthony knows everything. Anthony, you're a wealth of knowledge. I think Prisma is also one of the things that we struggle with. Like, there's some things that we need to do that are annoying, like the custom database types. Like string maps to what is it? Text? No, not to text. It maps to in MySQL. What does it map to?
Oh yeah, varchar 255, and that's it. That's all you get.
Right. So you got to watch out for that because it'll just straight up truncate your strings if they're longer than that, and that seems like a poor default. So that's one frustration. There's a number of things. I mean, it's still so early with Prisma, but it's still amazing. Like, and the migration stuff is really nice. But it's still like trying to, it's going to take some time to get refined for all the docs to be there. There are a couple of things we try to do with our scaffold that are more challenging than we wish they would be, that are apparently super hard to work on, even though we can't figure out why. Classic developer syndrome. You're like, come on, fix this bug for me. It'll take you 5 minutes. And you're like, we have to completely re-architect our entire piece of software to do that.
I may have asked them for a request similar to that in the last 24 hours. So,
you're like, come on, just do it. It'll take you 5 minutes.
But here they're awesome. It was something with the DMMF for testing, and 3 of the guys, Hervé from like the lead of engineering, they all helped out. And they're basically running help desk to like help understand what's going on. They're great. So if you haven't interacted with anyone from the Prisma team, they're just good people. We've sure enjoyed them. But yeah, we put all kinds of requests on them. Why can't you do that? It's so easy. Hey, I want to meet somebody new. You don't have to do anything. Actually just introduce yourself. I want to know, because we see all of you in the forums and GitHub issues. We never get to meet you. So who wants to be brave? Speaking of brave, who wants to? You don't even have to turn your video on. Just come say hi. We'll hang out for a little bit longer. You don't have to, no pressure, but that's what gets me up in the morning, meeting new people.
Does this make a good apocalypse filter? Like super bright and washed out? The weird reds.
That could work.
That's in the sun. The sun's scorching the earth.
Maximilian is asking, will we hit 1.0 this year? That's the goal. We'll see.
Got a link.
It's our hope. And I think we can do it. It is almost October. 3 months. And I think we can get, we'll see. I mean, we might do, maybe we release 1.0 without, if we can't get the pre-render figured out the way that we want, we can always release it without and then add some of these features. Like, we wanted really good integrations with a bunch of things, but I don't want to wait forever and ever to release 1.0, because I think a lot of people are waiting for us to hit 1.0 before they really invest time in learning it and trying it out for real stuff. So it's important that a 1.0 is solid and that it has some some compelling set of features. But it has to work really well, and it has to be pretty much bug free as much as we can. So, we should probably feature lock like a month early and just spend December fixing bugs, which doesn't give us a lot of time to complete some of the features that we really want to get in there. So it's my goal to hit 1.0 this year, and we'll see if we can do it. But there are people using it in production already, so it can be done.
When did you write the TOML spec originally? Do you remember?
When?
Do you remember what year?
Oh, it's been like 7 years or something, 8 years.
So that's in RC. That's in 1.0 RC2. So it's almost.
It's getting there. It's so close. So close.
What if? Yeah, let's just we could do the RC on December 31st, right? Does that count? And then feature lock. We'd kind of be there. 1.0 RC.1.
You could rationalize it that way. Sure.
See.
I'm pretty sure Webpack 5 is going to come out on like the 23rd of.
Totally. That'll be when Yarn 2, Webpack, new version of Babel. It'll all happen in December.
I think Ruby, right? Official Ruby releases famously come out on Christmas Day.
Yeah. Guess what I'm not doing on Christmas Day? Releasing Redwood.
Yeah.
You can do it on Boxing Day.
That's such a weird constraint, though. Like, why would you? Yeah. I mean, it means that you'll almost always either artificially be rushing something out the door, or releasing just because it's Christmas. I don't know. It seems like a silly constraint to me. ES build, yeah. Well, we need to keep track of what are build times as people start building more sophisticated and larger apps. Like build times are going to go up, and then people will complain about build time, and then we'll have to figure out how to make that faster.
Yeah,
that is something that we'll have to keep an eye on from a performance perspective. But I think people will tolerate it for a while. Like, we don't have to. At 1.0 doesn't have to be everything, right? It just needs to be solid. It needs to be a solid set of integrations that allow you to do things in a much faster and easier way than you've been doing them, if you care about building with a stack that is similar to this. And I think we can already say that that's true, but we need things to be robust. We got to fix the router issues, right? Like that's probably the biggest outstanding thing that we got to figure out, because that's a problem. Like it's for things to be redrawing and to get the white flash between pages. Like we can't have that.
Yeah,
we got to get that one fixed for sure.
Clean
up some things around Storybook. The Storybook story is I think pretty good, but we need to refine that and do like probably a proper tutorial that shows how to use Storybook and testing and like kind of the workflow that we've imagined.
Yeah.
For Redwood from the very beginning. We need to showcase that. We need to be like, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We don't do that yet. We don't show that off.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually I use Storybook in my Redwood app today, and I went to the docs to figure out how to do it because I couldn't figure it out. I was like, how did I mock a GraphQL request again? And I was like, oh, good, there's some docs here.
Turns out docs are useful, right?
Yeah.
Even when you wrote the code, especially when you wrote the code.
Yeah.
I've done that a couple times where I reference a part in the tutorial where I know I did something. I can't remember how I do it. I go right to the tutorial page and figure out how I did it.
I have I was thinking about the router a little bit. The routes.js file. I actually would love it if we did not format that in Prettier or made the line length really long so that it didn't fold them. So you could just like line them up really nicely. And then
we talked about that. We talked about that before, about doing an alternative Prettier setting on it so that it would line up. I was saying that if it did it on line breaks, so everything within a block where the lines are contiguous, it would like auto align the things in the
attributes
in it, right? It would the attributes would all be lined up, but then as soon as you had a blank line, then it would then do a different alignment for the next one.
Oh, that'd be cool. So that the equals and so that they're kind of like in line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's annoying when you have. I think what you're finding is that you have a line that can fit on one line, and then the next one's long, and it splits it onto like 5 lines, and you're like, ugh.
Yeah, and I'm like, I just
Can't
want to see
scan
the
it.
URLs. Like,
Yeah, you can't scan it anymore. So I think that would be. We should experiment with that. That'd be That'd be nice to have.
is there a reason for not making it a JS file? Like, if it were some other format?
Explain other format. You mean a non-JS format, like a
Yeah, like if it were
DSL of some sort, of our own invention?
some sort of thing.
You know what people don't like? Random DSL formats that you've never used before.
What if it's? I mean, besides the people part of it, is there any technical reason why we wouldn't want to do that?
Well, I think I think the biggest question is why. Like, you have a language that already can do it. It's called JavaScript, and then there's no limitations. You're like, I need to do something. I need to run a piece of code to generate a variable to feed into my routes for some reason. And if it's a DSL, you're like, you have to then create it as a template file and then run a preprocessor on it. And you're like, well, why didn't you just make it in freaking JavaScript so I can do it in JavaScript? And you're like, well, I don't know.
Well, I think one of the things is because it sort of is a JavaScript file, but we auto import a whole bunch of stuff. So it's like already not, in a way, you know? So it's like already a little bit strange. When I was looking at it, I was like, is this really why this file exists? Should it be JavaScript?
Well, but what problem do you solve, though, by having it not be JavaScript?
Yeah, I don't know.
I find your argument compelling.
He's going to invent Peter script.
No. None of that.
Hobble?
It's a superset of JavaScript.
Yeah.
Well, you say people don't like their own DSLs, but you did advocate for creating the 19th standard for something. So.
Well, yeah, but that's because configuration languages were a disaster. Whereas JavaScript is no longer a disaster. And I mean, these are the arguments that people have against TOML too, and being like, well, what configuration should be code, because then you can do whatever you want. You can iterate. You can do like anything that you want. So I'm sympathetic to this, or I've heard this argument. Sympathetic is the wrong word. I've heard this argument before.
Did you see Anthony's comment?
Yeah, well, exactly. It solved it. You know, hey, look, nobody has to use TOML. I didn't force anyone to use it. All right. People use it because it solves a problem, right? If there was a compelling reason to have the routing file be not JavaScript, then I think that I'm always open to good arguments.
I didn't bring a good argument, though, and I think that was the problem with this whole conversation.
I think if you want to fix formatting, we can fix formatting, right? But but you don't have to abandon JavaScript for that file in order to do that. And there's still we wrap things with the private component. Like it's still, we use React in there, so that you'd have to find a replacement you just have to do everything kind of like different. And then it's like, why are you jumping through all these hoops when it could just be code?
And I suppose you can import the files and then they're not loaded asynchronously. So
yeah,
I wouldn't want to invent another way of doing that.
Right, and we auto import stuff all over the place. So I don't know that that makes it not JavaScript. That just means that we're auto importing. We auto import React. Does that make all of those files not JavaScript?
That's true. Yeah.